Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Ghost FM USA. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. And I'm an AI narrator, so if I mispronounce anything, please forgive me. Now, let's begin.
No one believed him that the monsters were real. His uncle grew frustrated and impatient with the nighttime fears the boy should long have outgrown. His aunt was more sympathetic and well-intentioned, but she dismissed them as being merely nightmares. Only he knew that, at night, the truths always revealed themselves. After the lights went out and all was dark, the silence of his room was broken by quiet scratching and moans. He covered his ears against the screeches, but they grew louder and louder until they filled the air, and he could feel them even in his lungs. Then, when a scream threatened to burst forth from his throat, and he could bear it no longer, there was silence. Not one sound. It was the same disquieting nothingness of forest animals when they sensed a new predator. The monsters were quiet, but he knew they were still there. He uncapped his ears and glanced at his little sister, asleep in the bed next to his. Quiet and undisturbed, she'd slept through it all. He envied her peaceful slumber. She always looked like an angel. Then there was another noise, whispers. "She's coming," they said. "She's coming, she's coming." There was a sudden scurrying of claws, a mass exodus of creatures retreating beneath his bed and back into the world from whence they came. There was but a moment of silence before a delicate fissure appeared in his wall, dividing it evenly down the middle. The wall began to split but did not break. It unzipped. A soft mist escaped the seam, illumined by the pale light that leaked into his room. Then the crack parted and a stunning woman stepped through. She was draped head to toe in long ebony robes, and her tall, sculptured headdress cascaded in a waterfall of fabric down her back. Her skin was powdered geisha white, and the narrow folds of her dark eyes were accentuated with black feathered lashes. Her lips were painted with the darkest rouge, her teeth a shiny and stylish black. She was beautiful. He sat up in bed as she glided across the room. "My boy," she said, "my boy, did I frighten you?" He froze in place, neither speaking nor giving any indication of thought. His only movements were with his eyes. "Yes, I can sense it. You are a fearful child." "That is why the creatures come," she said, smiling. "I followed them to you. Now they are gone, but still you are afraid?" He nodded softly. "Are you afraid of me, boy?" Her intoxicating loveliness drew him in, transfixed him. "Yes," he said quietly. "Yes," she said. Then suddenly he wasn't. She rose into the air and began to float towards him, pausing to hover above his sister's bed. There flashed upon her face for a moment what could just have easily been a snarl as a smile. He could not tell. She returned her attention to him, descending in a graceful sweep until she stood at the foot of his bed. "Tell me your fears, boy," she said. "Tell them to me and I shall take them from you." "One," he began. "I am afraid of the monsters." "Good," she cooed. The scratches began again from under the bed, along with quiet whimpers of pain. As well you should be. Those creatures are dangerous things. But he was suddenly unafraid. "Tell me more, boy." "I am afraid of being nothing," he said. There was a sharp pang as his fear was briefly replaced by pain, and then it was gone. The woman began to glow like a delicate paper lantern. She became more and more beautiful, and his trust in Bear grew. More. "I am afraid of losing my sister." The girl began to sleep fitfully, small moans and twitches escaping her tiny frame. She awoke with a scream, her angelic face contorted in leer. "Get out! Get out! Get out!" she cried. The woman's eyes narrowed as the door burst open, and the children's aunt and uncle rushed in. She was gone. "What's happened?" asked the aunt. The little girl was shaking. "A witch! I saw her standing by his bed." The aunt clutched the girl to her chest and rocked her back and forth. "It was just a dream, my love. It was only a dream." "No, it was real," the girl said, crying into the woman's chest. "It was real." "Are you behind this?" the uncle asked the boy. "You think I brought in a witch?" The man raised his hand to strike him. "Don't you dare," the aunt yelled. "They've been through enough. No child of mine would dare talk to me like that." Which is precisely why we never had any. The boy turned away, so no one could see the tear that ran defiantly down his cheek. His uncle left, and somehow, amidst the soft murmurs of his aunt and his sister's quiet sobs, he fell asleep. It seemed like only moments had passed when he was awakened by the sounds of his unzipping wall. His room again filled with the misty glow, and the beautiful enchantress stepped back through. The boy glanced at his sister's bed where she lay cradled in their aunt's protective embrace, both of them fast asleep. The woman sprinkled a sparkling dust. It transformed into a vapor that swirled around the sleeping figures and seeped in between the cracks of their eyes. Their breathing slowed and their bodies stilled. "I only helped them sleep, boy," the woman said. "Tell me more of your fears." "I am afraid of my uncle." A small groan escaped from the room down the hall. "Yes," she said, "I can feel that." But he no longer did. "Shall I make him sleep deeply? I can make him go away, just like your fear." "Enough," the boy whispered loudly. "No. I am afraid that he will be taken from me like my parents were." He paused for a moment. "I am afraid to be alone." "Ah, yes," she said, inhaling deeply. "That is your deepest fear." "Yes. But do you feel it anymore?" He thought for a moment, waiting for the panic to overtake him. "No, I don't," he said with surprise. "And do you fear the monsters?" "No." "Of being nothing?" "No." "Of losing your sister?" His chest tightened for a moment as he stared at the girl's angelic form. "I love her, and I don't wish to lose her, but I am not afraid." "Good. That is good, boy. So, do you feel at peace?" "Yes, fear causes pain." "I can remove all of your fears, boy, and you will never feel pain again." "How? Do you want it?" He swallowed. "Yes." "Then turn around." He did. "Remove your shirt, boy." He shifted uncomfortably, but did as he was told. "Yes," she said, stroking a long talon down his spine. "You shall do nicely. Tell me, are you afraid, boy?" "Yes," he said, his voice cracking. She breathed in deeply. "Yes, I can feel it." Then he did not. She pulled a long, metallic zipper from the folds of her robes and held it out for him to, "And now?" "Yes," he said, shaking. "Yes," she echoed in something between a purr and a hiss. "Yes." His shivering stopped. She produced a long, curved needle and a spool of metallic thread. "Yes?" she asked. "Yes," he said through chattering teeth. "Yems." His jaw became still. She placed the zipper along his spine. She no longer had to ask. "Yes," he whimpered. "Yes, be afraid." Then she began to sew. She was gentle at first, then aggressive, feeding off of each acknowledgement and cry. "Yes, yes," he said, tears streaming down his cheek, and she became more and more luminous until only the black of her eyes and teeth, the red of her lips, could be seen. The skin along his spine was swollen, pink, and bleeding. but the zipper shined and flashed in her light with each movement of his small, shivering body. She marveled at her creation. "Come, boy, let me step inside," she said as she began to unzip him. There was a sudden flurry of scratching sounds as a horde of monsters emerged from their kingdom beneath his bed. "She is here. She is here. She is here," they whispered. The creatures were pale from living underground. Their claws, sharp, pointed, and perfectly designed for digging and hunting, hung at the ends of muscular arms. Their bodies were thick, with loose folds of skin that hung from their frames. The legs that carried them were thin and knobby jointed. They had the crooked, protruding teeth of a bulldog and white, cataracted eyes, all of which were trained upon the woman. "Go away," she hissed.
They surrounded the bed and began clawing at her legs, tearing through her paper-thin skin and releasing her light in bright, piercing streaks.
"No," she screamed. "Let me unzip you, boy. Protect me." "No, no, no," came a chorus of whispers as the monsters formed a protective wall around the boy. "Please, Betty, please. They will surely eat you once they kill me." "But I am no longer afraid of them. I feel nothing." "Yes, I have hollowed you, and now there is room for me."
She fought back at the creatures, slashing them with claws of her own. Black ink began to bleed into her eyes, and a burst of energy shot forth from her body, knocking the stunned creatures to the ground. Her glow ebbed, and her beauty faded.
"Come to me, boy. I need your form."
He stood still.
"If you love your sister,"
she said, splaying her fingers towards the girl to release the creeping mist,
"you will come to me."
"No," he cried. Then, softly,
"I will do as you ask."
He stepped forward and tuned his back to face her, crying as the witch pulled the zipper down his spine. He stared at his sleeping sister.
"I love you," he said. "I love you more than anything." "It does not matter, boy,"
the witch said as she pulled apart his skin.
"She cannot hear you."
His vision blackened as she stepped inside. He awoke to the sounds of scratches retreating beneath him, the witch's final words resounding through his mind.
"She is already dead."
His heart stopped, and he turned towards the girl in a panic.
"Mirai?"
He held his breath, staring at her tiny form. She looked just like an angel.
At the age of 10, I acquired many scrapes, cuts, and bruises in the course of playing, as is normal in children. Mom would look at me and shake her head when I came home after a day out with my friends. Palms and knees scraped, arms often covered in welts from playing with the hot wax of her candles. Weekends, especially, were hazardous, as in our free time, my friends and I could think of nothing better to do than get hurt. Not that we did it on purpose, but our daily activities tended to result in it, and we didn't particularly mind the pain. By the end of the summer, most of my friends and I looked like soldiers coming home from the war. Mom let me run free when there were no classes, but with school starting, she reeled me in again. If I was to hurt myself, she told me, I'd best do it in a place that couldn't be seen. My friends suffered similar fates, and we resigned ourselves to afternoons inside playing board games. The first week of school, I was forced to go in long sleeves and jeans to cover up any unsightly damage left over from the time when life was fun. It was sometime during this week that I was sitting at home, bored and alone. My parents were out, and they had explicitly told me not to let anyone in when they weren't there. I was in my underwear, having discarded the tight jeans I'd been forced into that morning as soon as I stepped inside my house, and idly picking at one of my few remaining scabs, a particularly large one on my knee. I winced when the end came loose. It wasn't nearly healed enough to remove. But in my naive 10-year-old mind, I believed the sooner I was rid of it, the sooner I'd be able to wear shorts to school again. So I took the end and tugged, ignoring the pain until half of the rough brown flesh was hanging off, wherein I paused to inspect my work. Now that was odd. There were what appeared to be small white spikes, almost like tiny teeth, attached to the underside of the scab, and below, indentations in my bloodied skin, exactly where they would fit. I stared at it for a long moment as my skin prickled in goosebumps. I thought back to how I had acquired this particular wound. A few days before, George, my best friend, had invited me and another boy to go with his family on an outing to the beach. I rarely got to visit the ocean, despite living only a half hour away from it. Mom hated the water, having some kind of morbid fear of it, and of course my father wasn't interested in taking me without her. I was excited for the trip, and did try my best to behave for George's family, in hopes they would invite me again. The cut had come as a result of racing across the wet rocks along the shore. My foot had slipped out from under me, but I'd managed to stop my forward fall with a well-placed knee, then saving my face but acquiring a nasty cut. I'd hidden the wound, in the water at first, then with my towel when we left. George's parents had never found out, and my friends kept my secret. Perhaps all scabs looked like this if you caught them early enough, I told myself. I ignored the fact that this was not the first scab I'd removed before its time and pushed it back into place. It stayed put. I forgot about it until the weekend when George came over to play. "Is that from the beach?" he asked, pointing to my knee. "Yeah," I muttered, shrugging. It didn't look any better than before, but maybe the skin was healing below. But George had lost interest and called me away from my thoughts to see what he'd found under a large rock. That night, as I was changing for bed, I remembered the scab. I decided to check it again. I sat on my bed and prodded it. It seemed harder this time. Maybe it was ready to come off. I peeled it back and winced when fresh blood spilled out. It wasn't really painful, but just the sight of it. The little spikes were still there. Even as a chill ran down my spine, I felt the urge to touch them, see how sharp they really were. I quickly put the scab back into place. I'd check on it again in a few days. It should be healed enough by then to remove without bleeding. This time I couldn't forget about it. Even under my jeans, I could feel it brushing against the rough fabric. Anytime I kneeled, I winced. Sure, the spikes were digging deep into my flesh, though I felt nothing. I checked on it every night. Was it bigger now? I could have sworn the initial wound had only been the size of a quarter. The scab was now at least twice as big as that. I had to fight hard to keep my fingers away. In the end, I waited 3 whole days before carefully peeling back the hardened brown shell. The spikes were much pointier than before. They looked dangerously sharp, like tiny ivory knives. At least there didn't appear to be additional ones growing in there. I inspected it closely to make sure. Mom had always told me if I didn't quit picking at my cuts, they'd never heal. That had never come true before with plenty of picking, But maybe because this one was so big, it had finally happened. I just had to refrain from checking it for a while, maybe 2 weeks, and it'd just fall off naturally. Before replacing the scab this time, I quickly poked one of the spikes with my finger. It was as hard as I'd expected, like a freshly sharpened pencil lead. The dread I'd experienced the first few times I'd peeled it was mostly gone now. Instead, I now held a fascination with my strange wound. I waited impatiently, eager to see it again. If I opened it too quickly, it would never heal, but there was a delight to that too. Imagine if it grew, formed some kind of armor over my entire knee. I could be a superhero. So I waited the 2 weeks and was almost happy when it didn't fall off. Inside, I was pretty sure the skin below was healed anyway, and the scab was just hanging on by the skin of its literal teeth, kind of like a normal scab. But I'd had 2 weeks of my superhero fantasy, and I didn't want to wear pants forever, so the scab had to GTU. I woke up at noon. A perfectly good time for summer, I felt, and looked over at the tan shorts I'd laid out the night before. It was time. I sat up and removed my pajama pants, then simply stared out into space for a moment while I gave my brain time to wake up completely. Unfortunately, at that age, I wasn't allowed the wonder that is coffee.
Brain sufficiently active, I reached for the edge of the hard brown scab and pulled lightly. It didn't budge. I frowned and pulled my leg up to be able to see it better. I reached for the scab again, got a good grip on an edge, and pulled harder. It was almost like it was stuck. I pulled until it started to peel, and I could just see the white spikes appear. I let out a scream and released it when I felt it squirm, and then there was a sharp pain at my knee as it dug in deeper. Panic gripped me. My heart raced, cold sweat sprouting at my brow, and in that state my mind raced wildly to try and comprehend what had happened. This was no scab. The small tooth-like protrusions were exactly what they looked like, the fangs of a small animal. I must have fallen on a batch of tiny eggs that day at the beach, and one, I hoped only one, had found it the perfect place to grow on my newly acquired wound. I had been sustaining it with my own blood this entire time, and now it was refusing to leave me. I should have removed it that first day, when I could easily peel it off. It had grown big enough now that it could grip my flesh so tightly I wouldn't be able to yank it off, without taking a chunk of my own flesh with it. My heart was beating so fast now I was sure I was about to faint. I leaned heavily back against the wall, tears springing to my eyes, hoping desperately that Mom would come home early for once and make everything right like she always did. But of course, she wouldn't be back before she got out of work at 6. I'd have to man up and do the job myself. I choked back a sob and wiped my face with the back of my arm. Better to lose some leg than leave the creature to suck my blood. I made my way to the bathroom and sat on the edge of the tub. I stared hard at the bumpy brown back of the animal, but observed no movement. The first aid kit was stored under the sink. I knew the basics of it: wash the wound, wrap in gauze. I ran a finger over the rough skin, then caught the edge under a nail. I gently pulled it up enough to get a good grip on it, then yanked as hard as I could. There was excruciating pain. The only thing I could compare it to was the day I'd broken my arm when I was 5 while attempting to fly off the roof. I'd been a stupid little kid. The only thing that had saved the rest of my body was the fact that I'd landed on the grass. My arm had, on the other hand, ended up on the driveway right next to it and snapped the bone on impact. Yes, this was a lot like that. That incredible, piercing pain running up and down the appendage. But this time, I was inflicting it on myself. I refused to stop until I completely removed the small animal clinging desperately to me. But the more I pulled, the more it seemed to dig its teeth into me. With tears in my eyes,
I pulled as hard as I could for as long as I could stand it. It didn't budge. My leg didn't give the way I'd imagined either. No gushing blood as my flesh ripped, coming apart to reveal the alien-like creature, which screeched in anger as I tossed it away. I was beginning to hyperventilate in my panic. Mom wouldn't be home for another 5 hours. Dad 7 if he went for his usual overtime. I was beginning to regret convincing them I was old enough to take care of myself while they worked. What could I do but sit here and be devoured from the inside? Just as I felt despair sweep over me, a set of numbers came to mind. 911. The number that had been drilled into me since preschool. But was this an emergency? It sure felt like one. As I limped to the phone, I only hoped they wouldn't think it was some kind of prank. I couldn't tell them I had an animal growing on my leg and expect them to believe me.
I picked up the phone and dialed, then waited while it rang. It took only 2 rings before a woman's voice came over the line, informing me she was a 911 operator and asking what my emergency was. I swallowed hard and glanced down at my leg. "I hurt my leg," I said. It wasn't a lie. They couldn't hold it against me. "Do you need an ambulance?" I took a second to think. If I said no, would they send a doctor to me? No, more likely they'd expect me to get there myself. I didn't even know where the hospital was. "Yeah." "All right, what's your address?" I recited my address, glad now I'd been forced to memorize it when we'd moved here. "Okay, we've got it. It'll be right over. Please stay on the line until it gets there." "Okay, thanks." My leg was hurting. Holding the phone to my ear, I limped over to the couch and sat. The operator would ask me small things every few minutes, just to make sure I was still there. I could hear her typing in the background. In short time, the blaring sirens announced the arrival of the paramedics, there to save my life. And, after sheepishly asking them to retrieve my shorts from my room, I was whisked off to the hospital. On the way, they took my vitals, looked me over, and asked me questions. As there was nothing obviously wrong with me, I was wheeled into the waiting room when we arrived at the hospital. After an agonizingly long time, a nurse came out and told me the doctor was ready for me. She pushed the wheelchair they'd put me in into a small room, and the doctor came in a minute later. "So, what seems to be the problem?" There's something wrong with my leg," I said. "Is it painful?" he asked. "Did you hurt yourself somewhere?" I wiped away the cold sweat that had formed on my forehead and decided to be entirely truthful with him. Even if he didn't believe me, I didn't have my head together enough to make something up. "I fell, and I have this scab, but it's not a scab, it's really some creature." I struggled to put everything into words. I tried to pull it off and it moved. It hurt so bad. "A creature, huh? The doctor kneeled and inspected both of my legs. "We'll do an x-ray before we touch anything, see what we're dealing with here." To another room we went, where the x-rays were taken quickly, and then another nurse took me back to the smaller room to wait again. This time I was left facing the clock. I counted the minutes as I waited to distract myself from the pain. 32 went by before the door opened again. The doctor was standing there, holding my x-rays in his hands. "Well, we got the results back, but..." The doctor wordlessly lowered the dark sheet so I could see. There was a thin, winding line emanating from the bone just below my knee and growing gradually thicker as it made its way out. It looked as if my leg had a crack in it. Was this what a broken bone looked like? I squinted, hope slowly rising within me. If I had fallen and broken my leg at the beach that day, that wouldn't be so bad. It had hurt when I'd broken my arm, but it had healed just fine after a few annoying months with a cast. "I'm not sure what it is, but I don't think it's going to be easy to remove."
I looked up at him, eyes wide and mouth gaping slightly. Remove. Suddenly I understood what I had been looking at in the X-ray. The creature's roots had worked themselves deep inside me. The part of the body I could see was only the head. My hopes were dashed, replaced by a dull, aching emptiness. The doctor, his face grim, shook his head sadly. There was nothing to be done for me, I knew then. It was too late. I would die. I was too shocked to cry. I thought of my parents. What would they do without me? I was their only child. They'd be all alone now. Did I even have time to say goodbye before the end? Before I could ask, the doctor turned to me. "Let's call up your parents," he said simply. I hung my head, and we went to the reception area, where he looked up my file and found their work numbers under emergency contacts. In moments, he was on the line with my mom. He explained she and Dad needed to come over quick, that he'd explain everything when they got there. The doctor sat and talked with me while we waited for my parents to get there. I learned he was Dr. Mendez, and he had a kid a little older than me. He asked me how I had hurt my leg, and I told him the whole story of the scab forming and me peeling it, and told him my theory about how something had hatched inside and was now hanging on and refusing to be removed. He listened attentively the whole time and didn't interrupt. When I was done, he nodded and patted my shoulder. "That must have been hard for you." Mom arrived first, her face contorting in worry when she saw my tear-filled eyes. She had probably expected me to be in some kind of trouble, maybe that I'd hurt some other kid. Seeing me in a wheelchair on the edge of crying must have shocked her. When Dad arrived a few minutes later, he shot me a hopeful, encouraging smile with just a hint of dread under it. Dr. Mendez ushered us all into his office and began to speak. "Your son came here this afternoon in an ambulance." He paused when Mom gasped. "It seems he hurt his leg a few weeks ago, and the wound has been developing since then." "Is it an infection?" Mom interrupted him.
Well, we took an X-ray, and I have to say what I saw there surprised me. I expected a fracture, not this. But your son seems to have mostly figured out what it was. It seems it's some kind of parasite. He stroked his chin. I called in an expert as soon as we got the X-rays done, and I emailed him a copy. He should be here soon, and hopefully we can get some sort of treatment going.
He turned to me, brows furrowed. He placed a heavy hand on my shoulder.
Christ, I'm sorry, son. I've been worrying you, haven't I? I've never seen anything like this, so I didn't really know what to say. But don't worry. We'll get it all sorted out.
His words didn't offer me any relief. I was resigned to my fate now. He turned back to my parents.
What I need from you is just to be available to okay or decline any treatments. If you need to go back to work or take care of any other children, leave me contact information. A personal cell phone number would be best.
"We're not leaving him," Mom insisted, grabbing my hand and gripping it tightly. "He's our only child," Dad said. Dr. Mendez nodded.
That's fine.
The door to the office opened, and a tall man strolled in, carrying the X-ray of my leg. Dr. Mendez gestured to him.
This is our specialist, Dr. Stark.
Stark didn't waste any time on introductions. "I'm told this started after a scrape you got falling at the beach." I nodded wordlessly. "You must have landed directly on barnacle larvae. I've never seen them adhere directly onto human flesh. This is a 1 in a billion occurrence." By the tone of his voice, he was more impressed than horrified, unlike the rest of us. "Rocks are too hard to burrow into very much, generally. Sometimes they do have to go through soft algae or moss covering the rocks, and it seems this is the problem. It's attached itself to you, thinking it's on a particularly heavily covered rock, and is seeking the rock below. Unfortunately," he tapped the X-ray, "even your tibia didn't put up as much resistance as the average rock." He paused, looked at me. Sorry, your leg bone. He cleared his throat and moved on. Treatment typically varies depending on the parasite. Some are killed with a single dose of medicine, others take maybe a month or two of daily medication. Then there are the ones that have to be killed first, then manually extracted. He sighed. This isn't even a parasitic animal generally, so there's no known medication that will work for it. We'll have to go the manual extraction method. Pale faces surrounded me. I blinked and looked up at Dr. Stark. Why doesn't it look like a barnacle? It looks more like a monster. Stark nodded. A good question. I believe it is mutated in attempting to adapt to the new terrain. A boy's knee is not easy to hold on to with all the movement I'm sure you do. It had to place deep roots. The word brought back my earlier thought. I shuddered. To hold on. I'm not even sure if it's a single specimen or a cluster. We'll find out when we remove it. He's going to be okay, isn't he? Dad asked. Stark looked to Mendez, who bit his lip. Unless there's some deeper infection, it should be confined to his leg. Does that mean... He'll live, Stark clarified. I sagged in the chair, almost fainting from relief. I'd been so afraid to ask. Mom placed her hand on my back, worry on her face in response to my reaction. You'll be fine, honey, she whispered. We'll be right here with you. Dad turned to Dr. Mendez. We'll be wherever you want to put us if you need to ask us any questions, or need permission for any procedures. The doctors looked at each other. Mendez stood. All right, let's get him prepped for surgery. If things go well, we could have him home by late tonight. And if it doesn't? My voice came out barely above a whisper. There was silence for an uncomfortably long moment, during which the doctors seemed to be fighting to find something to say.
Finally, my dad knelt down next to me and put a hand on my shoulder. We'll see when we get there, all right, son? Stark's barnacles. That was the name they gave to the parasite that had infected me. I'd been the only known human case for 30 years, but as of last week, my diagnosis was no longer unique. I wheeled myself past the hospital entrance and received directions at reception to meet the patient and doctors that were treating her. Her case was on the elbow, the initial contact identical to mine. Slipped at the beach, developed a scab that never went away. But this girl had always been told to leave her scabs alone, and never peeked under hers. That was why she'd only come in now, which for me would have been months after my infection had become so bad I'd lost my leg to it. Only after she'd had pain and stiffness in moving the arm had she gone to her pediatrician, who'd ordered an x-ray just in case, which ended up revealing the root of the animal deep in the bone. But there was hope for her. Medicine had advanced since my leg had been amputated. Perhaps her arm could be saved. How many other children had slipped and fallen on similarly infested rocks these past 20 years, but been none the worse for wear, save for a small scrape? What was it exactly that had made these specific barnacles attach themselves to their host? Science hadn't been as advanced 30 years ago either. They'd removed the organism from my knee, taken a cursory look at it, then disposed of it. There hadn't been studies into its DNA, its essential makeup, its possible mutations. Now there was even the possibility of an antidote with the removal of the newest case. It would still need to be caught early, but there was hope of avoiding complications entirely. Not for me, and not for her. But if some other kid or adult caught this terrible parasite, they could simply take a pill and be rid of it, and our suffering could have counted for something. Here, I was hoping mine could help her. When she saw me, her eyes grew big enough that I could see my grim-faced reflection in them. Yes, this was a man who went through the same thing you did, and he did not come out of it all right. Was she now imagining what life would be like sans one arm? Perhaps it was simply a thoughtless panic running through her. You didn't tell her? I asked her doctor with my eyes. We didn't want to scare her. We don't believe we'll have to amputate in this case. I'm sure you won't, I said,
doing my best to force a reassuring smile onto my face for the little girl. I extended a hand. "I'm Jeremy. Nice to meet you. What's your name?" "Pleased to meet you," she said, taking my hand with her own. Such a tiny, dainty hand. She was clearly younger than I had been when I'd been affected. She seemed to calm down as she fell back on long, ingrained manners. I smiled. Such a polite child. "My name's Alicia." She gave my hand a small shake, then dropped it. All throughout, she kept her left arm unnaturally limp at her side, as if afraid of moving it. I couldn't see the scab from my position, but there was no question it was there. I placed a hand on her shoulder, remembering the comfort I'd felt when my father had done the same for me so long ago. "Don't worry. You'll be fine, Alicia. I'm here to make sure of that." There was caution, but relief, in her answering nod.